Alright, well, this is a different kind of video. As you can see, I have the Return to Freddy's 2 Winter Wonderland as the background, mainly because this is a game that really inspired me to make this video, pretty much. I'd say for a long time, I never realized how incredible indie developers are when it comes to their inspiration or their passion, especially their willingness to work and put in so much effort for a project that might not even do very well. It kind of reminds me a lot of YouTube in that way for people who are starting YouTube. For a long time, right, I've seen 8-Bit Ryan do like 3 Random Games, that series, right, where usually a lot of indie horror games would pop up, and I always watched them, or even like the ones that were like separate videos. I always thought like, oh, I would just watch these videos. I never thought there was much point for me to play them, right? And a lot of this was because I was pretty lazy. I was pretty lazy. I was like, oh, but what if it's not really that good? You know, I was pretty oblivious to the whole idea. And that's changed a lot these past couple of months, I'd like to say. In general, I love horror games. I don't think I realized this when I was younger, but I remember one of the first major experiences I had with a horror game was pretty much Outlast, and that game terrified me so much to the point where I needed to talk to someone on Discord, or I think even on Skype, in order to actually be able to play it, because I was terrified of playing them by myself. I don't know, there's something I always loved about horror games, but in general, that was it's always been one of my favorite genres to play, or one of my favorite genres to like watch on YouTube for quite a while now. When it comes to playing horror games, I always stuck to the very big titles, either titles that usually blew up on YouTube, which wasn't too much of the time. It usually is going to be the big games from like these AAA studios, and that's pretty much what I've done for a while now. Outlast and Outlast 2 are kind of the exception, just because they did so crazy on YouTube and they got a lot of attention in general and kind of redefined the indie game scene in a way. Aside from that, I always stuck to the top popular titles. I never really thought like, I never saw any point in playing indie horror games, right? When I started uploading on this channel again, last July, I was pretty much uploading whatever I wanted because I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my channel. I didn't know what videos I wanted to focus on making. You know, a couple of months passed by, and in September, I decided that I wanted to record indie horror games. But the first indie horror game that I played was Summer of '58, which actually got quite a bit of attention, and I saw 8-Bit Ryan uploaded, and I'm like, ooh, that seems interesting. And I was about to start watching, and like, wait, this could, I thought that this was going to be a good opportunity to actually dive into an indie horror game for myself, right? And that's pretty much when I recorded and played one of the first indie horror games I've ever really played, in recent memory anyway. And I'm glad I took the dive in that case, because it led to a whole, like, the more I think about it, the more I realize like this really led to a whole chain to like the point where I'm at now. After a few months of playing indie horror games, right, a lot of them on itch.io, some of the more memorable ones, Summer 58, The Crypt, Animoyapolis. Like a lot of these games I ended up playing because I decided to start wanting to play indie horror games. And it became a point where I actually really started enjoying it. Like, I definitely have, like, as a result, after those months of playing indie horror games, right, I definitely appreciated the work that these indie developers put in, because it's not easy work at all. And I have no experience in game design at all, but especially like through a lot of the extra menus, through like a lot of these FNAF fan games that I've played, like seeing like some of the behind the scenes, like with regards to how like the office is set up, how the rigging for the models look, it really kind of enlightened me as to how much work goes into game development. And the result, it made me appreciate game development more, and it has allowed me to appreciate indie developers even more in particular, because a lot of times indie developers usually they do not have the financial backing that these AAA studios have. And in a way, they've become a sort of inspiration for me, because it feels like what I'm trying to do with YouTube is similar in a way, just because I've always wanted to do YouTube for years upon years, and I've tried, like when I was in high school, and not high school, in middle school. I remember I've tried just for fun, but I've always loved the idea of thinking, imagine doing YouTube, like just doing what I love, playing video games, recording them, putting them on the internet, right? And in a way, I kind of connected with that in a way. Though, I think it's safe to say these indie developers are way more creative than I will ever be. And so, seeing the hard effort that they put into their games, right? Seeing all that hard work come to life in these games, that ended up becoming an inspiration for me. I have this game up as the background, not just because of the really nice background music. This game inspired me to want to talk about this, right? And in general, what I'm talking about revolves a lot around FNAF and the FNAF community that I've become a part of through Game Jolt specifically. Now, FNAF has become quite a big part of my life. It was I think that a lot of people on the Game Jolt community can probably agree to some extent that it definitely was something that impacted them, especially like when you have these game developers, right? And when it first launched, I remember seeing all these videos on YouTube just start blowing up, and I just loved seeing that. And I remember a friend of mine pointed me to game theory, and that's when I saw like the very first FNAF game theory video. And it was now compared to the theories now, like that very first theory that Matt made, right, was very out there, just very, but it was a very interesting concept at the beginning. And I ended up playing FNAF, I think about a few months after, and it was not easy trying to beat 420 mode and everything. As Scott Cawthon released more of these games, right, they released more FNAF games, more FNAF theories came out, I watched more people play FNAF, right? I ended up connecting to the series a lot just because it was a very cool series that was out at the time. Over time, FNAF had kind of become that franchise that I just really connected to, in terms of it was like a very fun franchise to like pay attention to watch. Like overall, it was a lot of enjoyment, and it was really fun seeing like the experiences that people had with the games, and I never really had that kind of connection. And so FNAF became one of those series or franchises, whatever you want to call it, that I ended up connecting to a lot. With that said, around November, right, at that point in time, I hadn't kept up with the lore of FNAF for very long. I was up to date with the lore at around the time FNAF 4 was out. I remember when Sister Location was revealed, and I was like, wow, another game after FNAF 4. Who would have thought? And I don't know, I never really stuck with the lore after that, though. I don't know why exactly. I don't really remember. I don't really have a great memory for these kinds of things, but after Sister Location, or at least for Sister Location and onward, I didn't really pay attention to the lore anymore. In general, I kind of distanced myself from FNAF, like, not intentionally, but it just ended up happening. And that was pretty much it for FNAF for me, for like years now, years upon years. Not to say that I stopped enjoying FNAF. Around November, Security Breach's release was looming around the corner, right? And I really wanted to enjoy it for what it was, right? Because I already knew that this was another FNAF game. I didn't really know what to expect, because this was obviously very different from what we had in the past. So I ended up going through a crash course of all the FNAF lore, or at least most of it that I could understand, so that at the very least when I would play Security Breach, I wouldn't be like out of the loop, because that's the last thing I wanted. I understand a lot of the criticism behind Security Breach, understandably. It's very different from what we know FNAF to be, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I would like to see FNAF go back to, like, take a step back and kind of, be a bit more like how it used to be, you know what I mean? But that's a different discussion. When I finished Security Breach, it kind of revived that, it brought back that connection I had with FNAF that I had lost years ago, right? I don't know how to explain it. I remember playing security. I finished Security Breach, and I was just like, wow, and that's it. And then what? And then I just thought to myself, what? Am I just supposed to forget about FNAF for like years to come now? Or not years, but until the next game comes out. I didn't really want to do that. As a result, at the time, I had already played One Night at Flumpty's 3, which was on GameJolt, and I knew there was like a FNAF community on that and everything. So I thought, you know what? I might as well. Let me join. Let me just make an account in GameJolt, right? Let me just see what the FNAF community on GameJolt is like. And I'm not really used to like being part of a community in that way, so I didn't know what to expect. Safe to say, there's quite a lot on that, and a lot of creativity through that in that community on GameJolt alone, right? A lot. So there, like the amount of creativity, like, and the sense of community that there kind of is kind of crazy to think about in a way, and it's kind of nice to be a part of. And so I ended up joining that community, and right now as I'm recording, there's over 913,000 members on the GameJolt community alone, which is nuts to see, considering that, thinking back to almost 8 years ago at this point, FNAF came out in 2014, just a small indie game from Scott, and it expanded to this point now. And I think that is something that, honestly, I don't think I'll ever be able to truly understand, but I'll always be grateful for. And so that's when I decided I wanted to play more FNAF. I wanted to play FNAF fan games in general, because the only one I had played was Joy of Creation. And so we fast forward to now, right after I ended up joining the GameJolt community and a whole bunch of other FNAF communities as well, like seeing like the work that's put up through there as well. And I've ended up playing Mary's Arcade by Sunday, Ellie's by Scribby, the Project Readjusted Trilogy by Mechless, and the first 2 Jolly games by Ivan G. When I played through Mary's Arcade, Ellie's, Mechless's trilogy, Ivan G's, the 2 first Jolly games of Ivan G, right? Like, my appreciation for the community in general kind of just, I don't know. Even in this part of the script, I don't really know how to word it. Playing those games made me very happy that I made the decision that I did, because all those games I've mentioned just now were an absolute blast to play, right? It was so cool seeing the individual stories. It's cool seeing the takes that everyone has when it comes to storytelling and game design, right? But in general, those games that I mentioned are games I enjoyed a lot, and it pretty much made me appreciate the FNAF community more in general, and it made me appreciate the fact that I decided to join this community, right? And now there are 2 games in particular that really drove me to make this video, and mainly because these 2 blew me away in a way that I was never expecting. Kind of drove me nuts to see that people could really create this kind of, like, to create these kinds of, like, what I would call, like, you know, these kinds of products, this artwork creations. I don't know however you want to put it. I'm surprised that these are things that people can actually do, and I think something like that is incredible, and like part of the magic when it comes to the FNAF community. These 2 games are The Return to Bloody Nights, the demo specifically by Kosovsky, and The Return to Freddy's 2 Winter Wonderland by Luminance Productions. The first game hasn't come out yet, right? I know the demo's been updated, but I'm waiting on the full release. And I am truly excited. I am truly excited because just based on the demo alone, there's a lot of questions I have about, like, the new animatronics that came in when I was playing them. There are a lot of questions that I'm not going to get into just for the sake of time, but that game was the first game where it really made me feel, in general, I was left astounded by that demo, and I cannot wait for the full release. And when seeing that game, it was like, I was so amazed by the work that Kosovsky and the people that worked with him to make this, you know, that really, it blew my mind, to say the least. And I never thought I would ever, it's crazy for me to imagine that this is a area where FNAF is, as like a genre specifically, but this is the point where we're at with FNAF, with this the kind of creativity that people have and the kind of work that they put into their creations. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And now the second game that led me to do this was the most recent one I played, The Return to Freddy's 2 Winter Wonderland. Both of these games I found in the feature section of the hashtag FNAF games section on GameJolt. And so these two games left me in awe, to be honest. And that's not to say that the other FNAF fan games that I mentioned earlier don't compare, because at the end of the day, all these games to me have a special place in my heart, because playing these FNAF fan games are honestly some of the most fun I've had recording ever. Like, truly, right? And it's so cool to see. I don't know, I like the idea of supporting indie developers, individual creators, even like small development teams. Like, it really is just cool to me, I think. Like, seeing that passion, just when I play these games, I see the passion in them. I can imagine the passion they had, the drive to make these games, and that also ended up being inspiring for what I want to do, because that's something I struggled with when I first started doing YouTube back in 2020. I ended up burning myself out after a few months because I didn't really focus on the key part of having fun with what you do, right? With having the passion. I was too focused on numbers, because I'm a very numbers-oriented person, and so I thought so much about the numbers, and it put me in a very unhealthy mental state. Playing these FNAF fan games, right? I haven't had this much fun in what feels like a long while. I'm very grateful for FNAF, for the community that the people in general have made in support of what FNAF is, and I'm grateful for the people that have decided that they take FNAF as an inspiration to create their own, to make their own creations, to tell their own stories, to show their creativity, their imagination. And I think that's something that truly has inspired me, and just makes me overall even just more excited to play these games in general. And that's not to say that the regular indie horror games don't make me feel like that. Like, I've had a lot of fun playing indie horror games as well, but it's just that FNAF just has that for FNAF it's just a bit different for me, right, considering the history I've had with FNAF. And so I'm grateful for all of it, for FNAF, for Scott Cawthon for creating FNAF. I mean, just for this community on GameJolt and the FNAF community in general, the theorist community that, you know, works so hard to like try and figure out the story of FNAF. I'm grateful for FNAF having begun, and for what everyone has done to make the community, the FNAF community, what it is today. But that's enough of me blabbering on. If you did enjoy, if you liked hearing me talk about this, like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Hopefully I'll see you at some point. Take care.